Commander Vexthul had seen enough stupidity in his 3 centuries of service to fill a cargo freighter, but this was something else entirely. The human cadet stood in the center of the detention ring, barely reaching his shoulder height, staring down at the most feared predator in the known galaxy. The Razorclaw Alpha, designation Prime 9, had torn through 6 of the hegemony's finest warriors just last week. Its crystalline claws could slice through battle armor like it was made of tissue paper, and its bite force could crush a hover tank. And there was this tiny human girl, maybe 20 standard years old, wearing academy blues that looked 3 sizes too big for her, just standing there. Like she was waiting for a transport shuttle. Cadet Luna Martinez, Vexthul announced through the comm system, his voice carrying the weight of authority across 4 star systems. You have exactly 30 seconds to demonstrate your species' alleged combat prowess before we scrape what's left of you off the arena floor. The human turned toward the observation deck, and Vexthul felt his secondary heart skip a beat. Her eyes held something he'd never seen in a prey species before. Not fear, not determination, not even the suicidal bravery that some species mistook for courage. She looked bored. 30 seconds seems optimistic, Martinez said, her voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustic amplifiers. I'm thinking more like 5. The Razorclaw Alpha had been circling her since the containment field dropped, its movements fluid and predatory. Now it stopped, tilting its massive head as if trying to process what it had just heard. Its 6 eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, focused on the human with the intensity of a stellar core. Vice Admiral Korthak leaned forward in his observation chair, his tentacles writhing with anticipation. Finally, he muttered in his native tongue, "Let's see if these humans are worth the trouble of first contact protocols." The Razorclaw Alpha measured 12 feet at the shoulder, 26 feet from snout to tail, and possessed reflexes that made most species combat veterans look like they were moving through liquid nitrogen. It had been bred for one purpose: to hunt and kill anything that moved, breathed, or had the audacity to exist in its general vicinity. It launched itself at the human cadet with the speed of a plasma bolt. Martinez didn't dodge. She didn't raise her hands defensively. She didn't even blink. She simply said, "Sit." The universe seemed to pause, as if reality itself needed a moment to process what had just happened. The Razorclaw Alpha, mid-leap, mid-snarl, mid-everything, suddenly wasn't. Instead, it was sitting on its haunches like an oversized, overly dangerous house pet, its head tilted at an angle that suggested confusion rather than murderous intent. What in the 7 hells? Vexthul's voice cracked like a teenager's. The human walked up to the creature, which could have swallowed her whole without chewing, and scratched behind what passed for its ears. The Razorclaw Alpha's eyes closed, and it made a sound that could generously be described as purring, if purring sounded like a fusion reactor running at half capacity. "Good boy," Martinez cooed, her voice taking on the tone that every species in the galaxy used when talking to something cute and harmless. "Yes, you are. You're just a big scary baby, aren't you?" The observation deck had gone silent except for the sound of Admiral Korthak's tentacles hitting the floor. Lieutenant Zara Quinn, the hegemony's chief xenobiologist, was frantically taking notes on her data pad with all 4 of her hands simultaneously. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice filled with the kind of awe usually reserved for religious experiences. "The Razorclaw Alpha doesn't have pack instincts. It doesn't respond to dominance displays. It doesn't even acknowledge other life forms except as potential meals." Martinez looked up at the observation deck, still scratching the creature behind its armor-plated ear. "Oh, this is just basic animal psychology." You guys have been approaching this all wrong. All wrong. Vexthul's voice pitched higher than he'd intended. We've been studying predator behavior for millennia. Yeah, and clearly it's been working out great for you, Martinez replied, her tone dripping with enough sarcasm to power a small space station. Tell me, how many casualties have you had trying to contain this guy? The silence from the observation deck was answer enough. Let me guess, Martinez continued, now moving to scratch under the creature's chin, which it stretched out obligingly. You tried intimidation tactics, showed it who's boss, demonstrated superior firepower, maybe threw in some territorial challenges for good measure. Lieutenant Zara Quinn nodded mutely, her note-taking becoming increasingly frantic. Right. So you basically did everything possible to trigger its fight or flight response, and then acted surprised when it chose fight. Martinez shook her head. This isn't a warrior. This is a scared animal that's been backed into a corner for who knows how long. The Razorclaw Alpha had now rolled onto its back, exposing its belly to the human. Its 6 legs were sticking up in the air, and it was making the kind of contented noises that suggested it hadn't been this relaxed in years. It's showing submission, Lieutenant Zara Quinn breathed. To a human who weighs maybe 1/20th what it does. Weight doesn't matter, Martinez said, now giving the creature's belly a vigorous rub. Confidence does. Calm energy. This guy's been stressed out of his mind because everyone who comes near him is either terrified or trying to prove they're tougher than him. Commander Vexthul felt his worldview crack like a faulty hull plate. But the aggression patterns the territorial displays are stress responses, Martinez interrupted. Look, I grew up on a farm. We had animals that could kill you in a dozen different ways, but they didn't because they felt safe. This guy? She patted the creature's belly, causing it to make a sound that was definitely purring now. He's been in fight or flight mode for so long he forgot there was any other way to be. The human stood up, brushing off her uniform, and the Razorclaw Alpha immediately rolled back over and sat at attention, watching her with the devotion of a pet that had just discovered the person who gives the best belly rubs in the known universe. The real question, Martinez said, looking directly at the observation deck, is what you're planning to do with him now that he's not trying to kill everyone within a parsec. Admiral Korthak finally found his voice. We hadn't considered that he might be reformable. Reformable. Martinez laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. Sir, with respect, this isn't a criminal rehabilitation program. This is just proper animal care, something your species seems to have overlooked in favor of bigger guns and thicker armor. The Razorclaw Alpha, as if sensing the conversation was about him, stood up and moved to sit directly next to Martinez, its massive head coming to rest just above her shoulder. From the observation deck, it looked like a small human child standing next to a living siege engine. He's bonded to her, Lieutenant Zara Quinn said, her voice filled with wonder. In less than 5 minutes, she's achieved what our entire xenobiology department couldn't do in 3 years. It's not magic, Martinez said, somehow hearing the conversation despite the distance. It's just patience and respect, 2 things that seem to be in short supply around here. Commander Vexthul felt his pride, his assumptions, and his carefully constructed understanding of the universe collapsing around him like a house of cards in a solar wind. Cadet Martinez, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. How did you know? Martinez shrugged, the gesture somehow managing to convey both modesty and a complete lack of surprise at the situation. Like I said, I grew up on a farm. We had creatures that could level a city block if they wanted to. But they didn't want to because they trusted us to keep them safe and fed and happy. She looked around the detention ring, her expression growing thoughtful. This guy's been locked up in here for how long? No social contact, no mental stimulation, no comfort. You basically turned him into a living weapon by treating him like one. The razor claw alpha made a soft chuffing sound, and Martinez reached up to scratch his chin again. Yeah, I know, buddy. They didn't mean to make you miserable. They just didn't know any better. This changes everything, Admiral Korthak said, his tentacles beginning to regain some of their color. If we can apply these techniques to other hostile species. Whoa there, Admiral, Martinez held up a hand. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. This works because this guy's basically a really big, really dangerous dog. That doesn't mean every hostile species is going to roll over for belly rubs. She paused, considering. Although, to be fair, a lot of aggressive behavior does stem from fear and stress. So maybe treating other species with basic respect and dignity might yield better results than your current approach of shoot first, ask questions later. The silence that followed was broken only by the razor-claw alpha's contented purring and the sound of Lieutenant Zara Quinn's stylus frantically scribbling notes. Cadet Martinez, Commander Vexthal said finally, his voice carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there before. Would you be willing to work with our xenobiology department? It seems we have a great deal to learn about interspecies relations. Martinez grinned, and the expression was somehow both innocent and predatory at the same time. I'd be happy to help, sir. But I have a few conditions. Name them. First, this guy gets a proper habitat. Not a detention cell, not a containment area. It's a real living space with room to move, things to do, and regular social interaction. The razor-claw alpha's purring grew louder, as if he understood and approved of the negotiation taking place on his behalf. Second, any future testing or interaction protocols get run by me first. No more treating intelligent beings like laboratory specimens. Admiral Korthak's tentacles twitched nervously. That's quite an unusual request for a cadet. Yeah, well, this is quite an unusual situation, Martinez replied, her tone suggesting that arguing with her would be about as wise as arguing with the razor-claw alpha had been 5 minutes earlier. Unless you'd prefer to go back to your previous method of losing personnel to preventable incidents. The observation deck fell silent again, the weight of recent casualties hanging heavy in the air. Very well, Commander Vexthal said. Your conditions are acceptable. But I have one question. Shoot. How did you know he wouldn't simply eat you? Martinez looked down at the razor-claw alpha, who was now leaning against her leg like an affectionate cat that happened to weigh several tons. Honestly, I didn't, but I figured if he was going to kill me anyway, I might as well try something other than cowering in fear. She scratched behind his ear again, and the creature's eyes closed in bliss. Besides, predators can sense fear. If you go into a situation expecting to be attacked, you're basically asking for it. But if you go in calm and confident, treating the other party with respect, well, sometimes you get surprised. And if you had been wrong? Lieutenant Zara Quinn asked, her voice tight with the implications. Martinez shrugged again. Then I'd have been wrong very briefly, and you'd have learned something important about human stupidity versus human intuition. The razor-claw alpha made another soft chuffing sound, and Martinez laughed. Yeah, buddy, I know. Humans are weird. But hey, at least we're interesting, right? As she led the creature toward the exit of the detention ring, the massive predator following her like a loyal pet, Commander Vexthal realized that his understanding of both humans and predators was about to undergo a fundamental revision. And he wasn't entirely sure he was ready for what that might mean for the rest of the galaxy. 3 weeks later, Commander Vexthal stood outside Habitat 7, watching through the reinforced transparent aluminum as Cadet Martinez played what appeared to be an elaborate game of fetch with Prime 9. The Razorclaw Alpha was bounding around the expansive enclosure like a puppy, chasing after a sphere that Martinez had fashioned from scrap metal and padding. "This is insane," muttered Captain Grix Tar, the station's head of security. His 4 eyes were fixed on the scene with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. "That thing could shred her in seconds." "That thing has a name," Martinez called out, not bothering to turn around. "And his name is Buster." "Buster?" Vexthal's voice cracked slightly. "You named the most dangerous predator in the known galaxy, Buster." "He likes it," Martinez replied, throwing the sphere again. Buster bounded after it with enthusiasm that would have been adorable if it weren't coming from a creature that had previously been classified as a living weapon of mass destruction. "Don't you, boy?" The Razorclaw Alpha barked, a sound that registered somewhere between a sonic boom and a seismic event. Several junior officers in the observation area jumped backward, their survival instincts screaming at them to run, hide, or find the nearest escape pod. He's playing," Lieutenant Zara Quinn whispered, her voice filled with the kind of awe typically reserved for religious experiences. "A fully mature Razorclaw Alpha is engaging in recreational behavior. This violates everything we know about their species." "Maybe what we knew was wrong," Martinez said, finally turning to face the observation deck. "Maybe we were so busy being scared of what they could do that we never bothered to find out what they wanted to do." Admiral Korthak leaned forward, his tentacles writhing with nervous energy. "Cadet Martinez, while your success with Buster has been remarkable, we have a more pressing concern." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. You've got more angry critters that need a timeout instead of a death sentence." "Not exactly," Korthak said, his voice carrying the weight of impending doom. "We've received a distress signal from Research Station Omega-5. They're reporting a containment breach." The habitat fell silent except for the sound of Buster's heavy breathing as he waited for his next throw. "What kind of containment breach?" Martinez asked, though her tone suggested she already knew she wasn't going to like the answer. "They were studying a pack of void stalkers," Vexthal said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. 12 of them. The entire research team is trapped in the central laboratory, and the creatures have taken control of the rest of the station." Martinez set down the sphere, and Buster immediately sat at attention, sensing the change in her demeanor. "Void stalkers. Those are the shadow creatures, right? The ones that phase through solid matter and feed on electrical energy." Among other things, Zara Quinn confirmed. "They're also highly intelligent, work in coordinated packs, and have been responsible for the destruction of 17 colonies in the past century." "And you thought keeping 12 of them in one place was a good idea because—" The silence from the observation deck was answer enough. Martinez sighed, a sound that somehow managed to convey both exasperation and resignation. "All right, I guess we're going on a field trip." "We." Captain Grix Tar's voice pitched higher than seemed physically possible for his species. "Cadet, with all due respect, this isn't a training exercise. These creatures have killed hundreds of seasoned warriors." "Yeah, and your seasoned warriors probably tried to fight them," Martinez replied, already moving toward the habitat's exit. "Which, based on what I've seen of your tactical thinking, meant lots of weapons, lots of shouting, and very little actual strategy." Buster followed her to the exit, his massive form moving with surprising grace. When the barrier sealed behind them, he pressed his head against the transparent surface, whimpering softly. "I know, buddy," Martinez said, placing her hand against the barrier. "I'll be back. You keep an eye on things here, okay?" The Razor Claw Alpha's response was a sound that could have been agreement or could have been a declaration of war. With Buster, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. 2 hours later, Martinez stood in the shuttle bay, reviewing the schematics of Research Station Omega-5 while the rest of the rescue team prepared their equipment. The team consisted of 12 of the hegemony's finest warriors, armed with enough firepower to level a small moon. Remember, Commander Vexthal said over the comm system, the primary objective is to evacuate the research team. Secondary objective is to contain the Void Stalkers. Under no circumstances are you to engage them directly unless absolutely necessary. "Right," Martinez muttered, studying the station's layout. Because the last 17 times direct engagement worked out so well. Team leader Corax Venn, a veteran of 43 combat missions, looked down at the human with barely concealed disdain. "Cadet, I understand you had some success with a single contained specimen, but this is real combat. Perhaps it would be better if you remained on the shuttle." Martinez looked up at him, and Corax Venn felt his combat instincts suddenly scream warnings that had nothing to do with the Void Stalkers. "Team leader, with all due respect, your 43 combat missions haven't taught you how to handle a situation where shooting things isn't the answer. And you believe you can simply talk to them." Corax Venn's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Ask them nicely to return to their cells." "I believe," Martinez said, her tone carrying the kind of calm confidence that made seasoned warriors nervous, "that they broke out for a reason. And until we figure out what that reason is, we're just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again." The shuttle docked with Research Station Omega-5 47 minutes later. The station's corridors were dark, emergency lighting casting everything in a sickly red glow. The rescue team moved through the passages with military precision, weapons ready, sensors sweeping for any sign of the escaped creatures. "I'm reading massive energy fluctuations throughout the station," reported sensor specialist Threnyer. "The Void Stalkers seem to be feeding on the main power grid." "Which means they're probably not interested in eating the research team," Martinez observed. "They're hungry for energy, not organic matter." "That doesn't make them any less dangerous," Corax Venn replied through gritted teeth. "They could drain the life support systems." They reached the central laboratory to find the research team huddled behind a makeshift barricade of overturned tables and emergency equipment. Dr. Melthara, the station's chief researcher, looked up as the rescue team entered. "Thank the ancestors," she breathed. "We've been trapped here for 18 hours. The creatures, they're everywhere. They phase through the walls, drain our equipment, and then disappear before we can target them." "Any casualties?" Martinez asked, already scanning the room for signs of the Void Stalkers. "None yet," Dr. Melthara replied. "But they're getting bolder. We can hear them in the walls, in the ventilation system. It's like they're hunting us." "Or like they're trying to communicate," Martinez said thoughtfully. The room fell silent except for the hum of failing life support systems. "Communicate?" Corax Venn's voice was flat with disbelief. "They're predators. They don't communicate, they hunt." "Everything communicates," Martinez replied, moving toward the center of the room. "The question is whether we're listening." As if summoned by her words, the lights flickered and shadows began to move along the walls. The rescue team immediately raised their weapons, but Martinez held up a hand. "Wait," she said softly. "Just wait." The shadows coalesced into forms that were almost solid, almost real. 12 creatures that looked like they were made of living darkness, with eyes that glowed like distant stars. They moved with fluid grace, surrounding the group but not attacking. "They're beautiful," Martinez whispered, and every other person in the room wondered if she had lost her mind. The lead Void Stalker, slightly larger than the others, stepped forward. Its form shifted and wavered, as if it were trying to decide whether to exist in this dimension or not. It looked directly at Martinez, and she felt something brush against her mind. Not words, not images, but something deeper. Orations, confusion, fear, hunger. "They're scared," Martinez said, her voice filled with wonder. "They're lost and scared and hungry, and they don't understand why they're trapped here." "Impossible," Dr. Melthara said. "They're non-sentient energy parasites." "No," Martinez said firmly, taking a step toward the lead creature. "They're intelligent beings who've been kidnapped from their home dimension and imprisoned in a research facility. They broke out because they're trying to find a way back." The Void Stalker tilted its head, and Martinez felt another brush against her consciousness. This time she caught glimpses of something vast and dark and beautiful. A place where energy flowed like rivers of light, where creatures of shadow danced between dimensions. "They're not from our universe," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're from somewhere else entirely, somewhere where the laws of physics work differently." "Even if that's true," Coraxven said, his weapon still trained on the creatures, "it doesn't change the fact that they're dangerous." "They're dangerous because they're starving," Martinez replied. "Look at the energy readings. They're not feeding on our power grid because they want to hurt us. They're feeding on it because they're dying without the kind of energy they're used to." She turned to Dr. Melthara. "How did you capture them?" We used a dimensional rift generator," the researcher admitted reluctantly. "We opened a tear in space-time and pulled them through." "And then you locked them in cages," Martinez said, her voice carrying a note of steel that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. "You ripped them away from their home, their family, their entire reality, and then you were surprised when they tried to escape." The Void Stalkers had stopped moving, their glowing eyes fixed on Martinez as if they were hanging on her every word. "Can you send them back?" she asked. Dr. Melthara nodded slowly. "The dimensional rift generator is still functional. But it would take several hours to recalibrate, and we'd need to restore main power to the station." "Then that's what we do," Martinez said simply. "Absolutely not," Coraxven interjected. "We're not negotiating with hostile alien entities. Our orders are to contain or eliminate the threat." Martinez turned to look at him, and every person in the room suddenly understood why the Razorclaw Alpha had chosen submission over confrontation. "Team leader, these aren't hostile alien entities. They're refugees who want to go home. They've caused millions of credits in damage." "They've caused damage because they're desperate," Martinez replied. "Because every time they try to communicate, someone shoots at them. Because every time they try to find a way home, someone captures them for study." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every member of the rescue team. "We have a choice here. We can keep treating them like monsters, keep fighting them, keep losing people to misunderstandings and fear. Or we can try something different." The lead Void Stalker moved closer to Martinez, its form becoming more solid, more real. It extended something that might have been a hand, might have been a tentacle, might have been pure shadow given form. Martinez reached out and touched it. The contact sent shockwaves through both dimensions. For a moment Martinez saw through the creature's eyes, saw the vast dark beauty of its home realm, felt the aching loneliness of being trapped in a universe where the very air was poison to its kind. And the Void Stalker saw through her eyes, saw a young woman who had grown up understanding that the most dangerous creatures were often the most frightened ones. "They'll help us restore power to the station," Martinez said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "They'll help us repair the dimensional rift generator, and then they'll go home." "And if they don't?" Coraxven asked. Martinez smiled, and the expression was both gentle and absolutely terrifying. "Then we'll have learned something important about the difference between trust and fear." 6 hours later, Research Station Omega-5 hummed with activity as the combined efforts of the research team and the Void Stalkers restored power to the dimensional rift generator. The creatures had indeed helped their ability to phase through solid matter, making repairs that would have taken days possible in hours. As the generator powered up, the Void Stalkers gathered around the dimensional rift, their forms beginning to shimmer with anticipation. The lead creature approached Martinez one final time, and she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her mind. "Thank you," she whispered, and though the words were in a language the creature didn't understand, the meaning was clear. The Void Stalkers stepped through the rift one by one, returning to their home dimension. As the last one disappeared, Martinez felt a profound sense of loss, as if she had just said goodbye to family she would never see again. "Remarkable," Dr. Melthara said, her voice filled with awe. "In all my years of research, I never considered that they might simply want to go home." "Most people don't," Martinez replied, watching the dimensional rift close. "It's easier to assume that anything different from US must be hostile." Commander Vexthal's voice crackled through the comm system. "Cadet Martinez, report." "Mission accomplished, sir," Martinez replied. "The Void Stalkers have been returned to their home dimension. Research Station Omega-5 is secure, and the research team safe and sound, sir, though I suspect they'll be revising their research protocols." There was a long pause before Vexthal responded. "Cadet Martinez, upon your return, please report to my office. We have much to discuss." As the shuttle departed Research Station Omega-5, Martinez stared out the viewport at the stars, wondering how many other monsters were out there, waiting for someone to see past the fear to the being underneath. Back on the station, Buster was waiting for her in Habitat 7, his massive form pressed against the transparent barrier. When he saw her approach, he barked with joy, a sound that shook the entire deck. "Miss me, buddy?" Martinez asked, entering the habitat. Buster's response was to knock her down with an enthusiastic greeting that would have been fatal if delivered by a hostile creature. Instead, it was just the universe's most dangerous apex predator being happy to see his favorite human. "Yeah," Martinez said, scratching behind his ears as he settled down beside her. "I missed you too." And in that moment, Commander Vexthal realized that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Not because of new weapons or new technologies, but because of a young human woman who had the audacity to treat monsters like people. The universe, he thought, was about to become a much more interesting place.